want to start off with, be not afraid. Be not afraid. But I don't know about you, but many of us have been busy preparing for Christmas. You know, running around, trying to find the perfect gift. We're on a mission to please others. This is the last week of Advent, and we have 7 days until Christmas. We have a full week of rushing around, trying to find a parking spot, wrapping gifts, cooking, eating, and watching the Ravens beat Pittsburgh. However, we might consider to be more attentive for the special grace offered in this sacred season. For many of years, my attention, and maybe many of yours, were focused on Mary, and it's rightly so for the mother of God's Son. However, a lot of preparation had to be made for that first Christmas by Mary and Joseph. They had to prepare themselves, as we should say, by saying yes to God's plan for salvation. Today, our gospel focuses on the preparations made by Joseph for that first Christmas. It was the most difficult preparation for Joseph. I don't know what I would have done if I had to make those decisions. What about you, church? At the time of the gospel, Jews who to marry were engaged to each other 1 year before they were married. For the year, they were legally united but did not live together. This period of time was a strong commitment, as strong as the marriage. The only way to be relieved from the engagement period was divorce. A year later, the wedding ceremony took place, and then the couple came together to live. During the year before marriage, Joseph learned that Mary was pregnant. He was shocked and amazed. He must have to endure. He didn't know what to do because he loved his wife-to-be. The Jewish tradition at that time was if a woman committed adultery, she was taken to her father's home and stoned to death, both her and the baby, and the family shamed. Joseph's plan was to quietly divorce Mary. He hoped that this would get rid of the baby mama drama. What is that saying? If you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans. I have been there, church, and done that. And I know some of you have done that too. A friend of mine gave me a great insight, which seems to complicate it, but it makes it sense. Said Mary knows that she was still virgin. But Joseph didn't. And this troubled him because he loved himself some Mary. He was caught up between his feelings and the Jewish law. I think it would have been difficult to cover up a pregnancy in such a small town. But you know how things haven't changed much over all those years. How many of you right here in this church cannot keep a secret or juicy gossip? It seems sooner or later everyone is going to know. Hey girl, do you know what happened to Mary? Yeah, the one that was going to marry Joseph. In those days, the news traveled faster than Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And they didn't have telephones or computers. We all know that the angel Gabriel, the voice of God, appeared to Mary, asking her to be the mother of Jesus. And she said yes, despite the possible consequences of her pledge to God. She loved and trusted God. Joseph, too, like Mary, received a visit from an angel during a dream, asking him to agree to God's plan. Joseph's role was to name the child Jesus, by which action he claims the child is legally his own. In this way, the genealogy that opens Matthew's gospel and the proclamation of Isaiah affirm that Jesus belonged to Joseph, to the people who inherited the promise given to Abraham and David. Want me to read that again? No. Joseph is described to us today as a just man. That is to say, a man who is committed to doing the will of God. This characteristic is most noted in the Gospel of Matthew, which concludes with his obedience to the message that came to him from God in a dream. Remember that Joseph had 2 other dreams from God, one to go to Egypt and the other to return to Israel. His reactions are the same. As soon as he knows God's will, he immediately does it, even though by doing so, he is risking everything and going into the unknown. Today, we can take this example of Joseph's complete trust and faith in God, and to try our best to trust God. Let him order our steps and be courageous enough to follow God despite the consequences. Because God has a plan for all of us. And many times we don't know the outcome. However, we are to believe and trust as Joseph. Because Joseph, more than anything, as we should be, wanting to do what God wants. His will be done, but not our wishes. And Joseph's example to us, the most basic and important response to God, is that we too are willing and able to follow God's word. Did you get that, church? We are to live our lives away, give our lives away to God and for God, and ask ourselves how difficult it is to surrender to God daily. Then the second question is, what is stopping us from doing so? We are to go immediately when called. We are to walk by faith and not by sight. We're not to say, not yet, God. You know, God, I have something else to do. You know, this is Christmas, and I got to get gifts for that person, that person. We ought to be ever ready to do his will. Imagine if Joseph doubted the angel and thought he could solve the problem himself, or waited a month before doing God's will. We are to love and trust God with our hearts and souls. There is no greater love, my brothers and sisters. We are to follow God and don't look back. Remember that Temptation song, Don't Look Back? I just changed the words. Just put your hand in God's. We're going to leave all our troubles behind. We're going to walk and don't look back. Because many times we look back, we have a case of I should have, I could have, I would have, and I. And we find it hard to move forward. I know there's at least one person out there know what I'm talking about. There's another but subtle lesson for us today. One would suspect that Joseph loved Mary, her purity, her profound love for God, which she shared with everyone, including the man who sought and been given her hand in marriage. And describing Mary's pregnancy, Matthew wants us to look beyond the physical and biological to the spiritual dimension of what is happening. Mary is described as a virgin. Her first love is for God. In this day and time, there are many first loves we get tangled up with. They seem to overshadow our love for God. However, with Mary, it is because of her love for God. She has welcomed and responded to God's embrace, that the child conceived to God's own loving son. In the dream, Joseph was revealed to him that he too had a role to play, to accept the child as his own, and he to take Mary as his wife. He loved and nurtured both. Never have obedience to God has been more joyfully given. We are all called to learn from Joseph, not to trespass carelessly on sacred ground. You might ask, what that mean, Deacon? How easily we take people for granted. This is especially true to those closest to us, like our spouse, children, good friends, and our relationship with God. Because many times we take God for granted too, church. We think he's always there, but we don't call him. We think we can fix it ourselves. Joseph reminds us that there's a sacred mystery being enacted in the depths of our souls of every person. Because love does not violate or use. Love does not presume or possess. We, like God himself in relation to Mary, must wait for the other person's yes. In the book of Revelation, Jesus tells us that he is standing at the door of our heart, knocking, waiting and hoping we will open our hearts to him so that he can come in and share an intimate moment with us. As the psalm today tells us, let the Lord enter, he is the King of glory. How many of us have locked our hearts to Jesus? How many have closed our hearts out of fear? Fear of the unknown. For many times in the Bible, we have been told, do not be afraid. Joseph shows us what this means. Mary has accepted Joseph's offer, and she promised to be his wife. He is sensitive that God is working in her and waits on God's word before taking her as his wife. Such sensitivity, such awareness of the sacred is a beautiful gift we could all pray for as Christmas approaches. Imagine the sacred reverence when Joseph looked upon the Christ child and gently took him into his arms. May we welcome the child Jesus with the same reverence. This, my brothers and sisters, is the grace of Christmas. That beautiful baby that we once were, still is, and truly alive in us. No matter how hurt we have been and still are, no matter what has distracted us, no matter how injured we have been by others' sins or by our own sin, for there's a balm in Gilead to heal our soul. It is our humanity that binds us together in one human family. Of course, our humanity is imperfect. Come on, church. Don't you think God already knows that? It is this real human condition that God embraced in the incarnation. Let us embrace each other's mystery in our own. Only God can heal us. And all God's love is available to all of us. As he wakes us daily, we start anew. Remember the line in the song, great is thy faithfulness. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All that I have, thy hands have provided. Great is thy faithfulness unto me. Mercy, Lord, mercy. We should embrace those daily mercies and begin the life that every night is Christmas Eve and every day is Christmas and Easter. We will be like Joseph and Mary, living with God's Son each and every day. What a different and wonderful world we would have if we only lived as Easter and Christmas people. As we watch the baby Jesus held in the arms of his Father, let us embrace him. He will not refuse. Let us, like Joseph, respect this sacred place, especially in our children and by our reverence of our children. We are reminded that we are all children, children of God, and are aware of our own ordinariness and imperfections. But let us be gentle with each other so that our love will awaken others to the intimate invitation offered each of us by God to be the bearers of his word. Each of us, in our own way, are encouraged by the Blessed Mother Mary to say yes to love, and by Joseph to stand in reverence as the mystery of our lives unfold in all its simple wonder. If today you hear his voice, his knock, he is waiting for you and me. Harden not your hearts, because Emmanuel is with all of us.